Um, Greatness, like, it's really reasonable that in our programs around in architecture and visual arts and performance, you all have probably heard conversations about failure and about how sexy failure is, how great failure is. And it feels like in some ways it's a great way for faculty and our peers to help us be mediocre. And also a way of giving us courage to make mistakes and take risks. But I want to tease out this idea of greatness a little bit, like greatness being something that when you look at your peers, it seems like they were born with it. Like you look at them and you're like, right? Like their shoes fit right, they never fall, they're not fat, they don't have pimples. And it's like they were just born to do something great. And I feel like there are other people who, they're raised to be great. Like, they ain't really smart, you know, they're not really funny, they're not really made to do much with their lives. But they bump through these systems and these structures, and their mom, who has predetermined that anything that comes out of her womb is going to be great. And I have to admit that I wasn't born to either kind. That I actually believe that as a West Sider of Chicago, on Chicago Avenue in Pulaski, there's nothing of my birth that would have signaled greatness in a way that is measurable by me being conferred this degree today. And there's nothing in the nurture in a way that would have signaled to the external world that the things that my mom and dad put inside me would amount to anything to anyone else. And so there's this third way of imagining greatness that I kind of want to talk about. It has to do with the amount of work that we're willing to put in order to see projects done. And ways of imagining greatness by a lens that's internal versus who's showing at what gallery in the Art Forum magazine. That I'd rather imagine greatness being a kind of fight against mediocrity, which is the thing that could actually come quite normal for all of us. And that when we're in our studios, making lines and making moves and flexing our muscles, that if we could spend more time thinking about the possibility of greatness over the possibility of ongoing mediocrity, that might be interesting. So I did write a couple things about like, what do I mean by greatness? And these are kind of like mantra points for me. Greatness has something to do with care. The way that we approach a project and decide that we're gonna invest deeply in that project because it has more meaning than the output and the audiences that'll see it. That the care is something that's just about the amount of attention we're willing to give a thing. That it has a lot to do with excellence. And I feel like when I think about the SAIC students, that it seems like the notion of excellence and discipline are more implicit in some cultures than in other cultures. And that's a really interesting thing, that there's a way in which the care and excellence go together, but not like tight, and not necessarily like perfect, but just a kind of determinism around like the things that we do, right? So if it's gonna be like jacked up detritus, that it's the most excellent jacked up detritus possible. The other thing that I think around greatness is that it has something to do with an internal striving, a way of imagining that the rules that beset us or the lack of rules in front of us in this artistic moment. That if this is the moment when we can do anything in the world and have it fall under the rubric of art, then what are the things that guide the work that we do? And the reason why this internal striving feels so important to me is because, well, I worked for years and nobody was really interested. That I'm standing before you at 40, and it's only been the last 4 years that there's been any public acknowledgement of the work that I do. And so what do you do between 22 and 36? You continue to care. You continue to try to find a motivation that is one that's internal, and that it's a striving that has less to do with the market and less to do with the audience and more to do with calling. That the thing has to be internal first, or you'll leave art, you'll leave architecture, you'll leave design. You'll feel like you failed, but that's the wrong kind of failing, because I feel like it's something like fonts. It's something that you have to do over time, but it should be a life calling. I have these other things, like willingness to be self-critical, humility, these things. But I feel like the bigger part of it is that I try to lay before myself a really big problem, the South Side of Chicago. And I decided that, like, from the very beginning, there was no way that I was gonna lick poverty, that there was no way that I could, like, solve homelessness. And that homelessness as a form wasn't necessarily the most sexy thing that I could think about. But I don't really think that it should be relegated to one side of being called a social practice. What I believe, Lisa, is that artists should believe deeply in the things that we make and believe deeply in the things around us. That we should imagine ourselves as full citizens in the world. And if we do that, there will be times when the work that we do is about ourselves, our studio, and that output that goes to a museum or a gallery. And then there'll be times when it could do something with a different kind of symbolic and maybe even real in that other way of real impactfulness. That I'm not here to convert everybody into a relational aesthete. I'm not going to ask that you give up your studio spaces and put a cross on your arm and move to Waukegan. Save all the poor people struggling in Waukegan from the lack of cultural opportunities. Anybody from Waukegan? I'm sorry. I was just really feeling myself. But maybe there's a way that we could have a desire to execute at the highest level possible for us. And that for a long time, all I could do was work with one little house, with my little salary, and do it after work, and then work on it a little bit more. And some of you guys know this story. When I bought the house next door to me, I couldn't afford to rehab it, so I would sweep it, and I would call those sweeping performances. And I would invite people over to my sweeping performances. For you performance art people, I would take my clothes off and sweep. For you arts administrators, I would invite other cultural workers over and photograph us all sweeping together. For you entrepreneurs out there, I was already imagining how I might flip the house. And all of that started to turn into a kind of practice, a way of seeing the world that was both engaged with like a kind of poetic conversation of what was possible, and also saying, you know what? If I don't think about the West Side of Chicago, ain't nobody gonna think about the West Side of Chicago. If I don't think about these abandoned buildings, I can't expect people who don't live in this neighborhood to think about these abandoned buildings for me. And And so I just made the equation of my life a little bit more complicated, that instead of it just being art equals studio plus gallery, it became like art plus studio plus world equals opportunity. That I was willing to complicate a practice enough until it might actually have some other consequence in the world, and it just might change my life. To you all, I'm so freaking excited that you guys won't be in school anymore. But I'll just say that in the absence of an external driver, on the days when no one's interested, remember why you make. Thank you.